Our next speaker, who we may still have technical difficulties with Ustreaming, but we'll try to get you sound, is Dr. Cyril Wecht, who's a Juris Doctor and a medical doctor, JDMD. And his topic is forensic science and the assassination of President Kennedy. He asked me what to talk about, and I said it might be of interest to people to know how you felt a good autopsy of John F. Kennedy or a similar case would look like, you know, how forensics should have been applied in the case. So I'm sure he'll talk about that somewhat. Cyril Wecht was the first president of Coalition on Political Assassinations, and he's a nationally renowned forensic pathologist, attorney, and medical legal consultant. And Dr. Wecht received his medical degree from the University of Pittsburgh, his law degree from the University of Maryland, and he's also a fellow of the College of American Pathologists and the American Society of Clinical Pathologists. And he served as president of the American College of Legal Medicine, the American Academy of Forensic Sciences. The author of more than 500 professional publications, Dr. Wecht is also an editorial board member of more than 20 national and international medical, legal, and forensic scientific publications. He's performed approximately 14,000 autopsies. He's supervised, reviewed, and been consulted on approximately 30,000 additional post-mortem examinations. And Dr. Wecht has frequently appeared on several nationally syndicated programs discussing various medical, legal, and forensic scientific issues, including medical malpractice, drug abuse, the assassination of both President John F. Kennedy and Senator Robert F. Kennedy, the death of Elvis Presley, the O.J. Simpson case, and the John Benet Ramsey case. His expertise has also been utilized in high-profile cases involving Mary Jo Kopechne, Sonny von Bülow, Jean Harris, Dr. Jeffrey McDonald, and the Waco Branch Davidian fire, and Vincent Foster. A comprehensive study of those cases is discussed from the perspective of Dr. Wecht's own professional involvement in his books Cause of Death, Grave Secrets, and Who Killed John Benet Ramsey. He also directs the Cyril H. Wecht Institute of Forensic Science and Law at Duquesne University in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So he's a very renowned forensic scientist, has been on our team for a long time, and we're doing our best to get through to him.
Are you guys having television problems, huh?
Yes, but we can go ahead and hear you directly. I'll put my cell phone on speaker to the microphone and we can hear you.
All right, how's your meeting going?
It's going really well, Cyril, and outside of technical difficulties, we're still somehow getting the word through, and people seem to be enjoying it. So.
The fucking CIA, they never stop fucking around, huh? I mean,
I think they understood the French here. They're laughing.
Have him try to log on one more time.
Oh, try to log on one more time, they said.
Broadcast one more time.
Try broadcast one more time. But go ahead and talk, Cyril. If we get you on the other way, we'll plug you there.
okay, well, I'm here, and so you're wrapping it up tomorrow?
I'm sorry. Well, yeah, we're wrapping up tomorrow.
Put it down, John. To the ear. The top of the ear.
Not hearing you.
Pardon me?
You can go ahead and talk, Cyril.
Okay, well, go ahead. What do you want to open it up then, or what?
Yeah, go ahead. Just start talking, and if you get on the broadcast, we'll catch you.
Yeah, John. I would like people to ask questions and make this as informal as you wish. Really, rather than just have me talk. In fact, maybe you want to start it off with somebody asking some questions. I don't know exactly where you want me to pick it up, but tell me, John, whichever you prefer. I'd like to accommodate your folks and address issues that they wish to focus on.
Okay, well, we can take some questions here for you, and if anybody has one on, he's got a wide range of cases he worked on, if anybody has a question.
A question on a case he did not work on, but may have a thought or two or a question, and that was the SLA shooting. were the bodies in the place where the police said they were, in other words, down in the bottom part of the home, burned to ashes, or were there other questions he heard about the SLA shooting that people directed to him?
He was being asked about a case that maybe you didn't work on, the shootout of the SWAT teams in Los Angeles, I guess it was, with the SLA, Symbionese Liberation Army, and whether or not the...
No, I was consulted by Dr. Tom Noguchi, my good friend and colleague, the chief medical examiner coroner of Los Angeles, in the Symbionese Liberation Army case pertaining to the shooting there. The SLA chief who was shot, and the question of how many shots, was he still alive when they shot him, and so on. I was involved in that case. I'm trying to remember the details, but it had to do, as I recall, with the questions that were raised as to whether or not it was a necessary killing or whether it was overdone. That's my recollection. I don't recall then that anything proceeded thereafter in terms of any kind of a civil rights action or wrongful death action or so on. At least I was not subsequently involved. That is my recall on that particular case.
Yeah, I guess part of his question was, did you know anything about the positioning of the bodies, or they were burned in the lower part, or any discrepancies?
Well, yeah, those, I wish I had known in advance as somebody, because I would have gone to my files and engaged in a bit of a memory recall. But the person who has asked the question obviously has some knowledge of that case, and my mind is being refreshed, but not with specificity. But those indeed were the questions, shooting and burning and the positions and so on. And I remember reviewing everything and discussing it and rendering my opinions with Dr. Noguchi. But I'm sorry, I cannot. I don't mean I'm not permitted, or that there's some confidentiality situation here. I'm just not able, by way of my memory, to give you a specific answer. I'm sorry.
That's all right. Another question, just a sec.
Talking about the cases, let me mention, you guys are around 8 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. I guess 7 o'clock there, if you guys are around, and if any of the local, well, not any, if the local NBC station carries the Today Show, some local NBC stations do not carry the Today Show on the weekends, as I came to learn here in Pittsburgh, and some do. But I will be on a tape earlier today on a portion of jawbone with one tooth that was found there in the Caribbean area, and it's been sent over to the Netherlands for examination to determine if it is Natalie Hollowell's. So I made comments on that, discussed what a forensic odontologist does, talked about DNA analysis, how they go about identifying this kind of a fragment and so on. I think anybody interested in forensic science would find this informative. I don't know, of course, what they are going to find, but I just talk about what they'll be doing, how the test proceed, how long it takes, and so on. So that should be tomorrow. If you find that NBC local stations here, or maybe back at anybody's hometown where it could be recorded, does carry the Today Show on the weekend.
Okay, there's another question, just a sec.
Yeah, could you enlighten us on the Vince Foster case?
Could you enlighten us on the Vincent Foster case?
Yes. Vincent Foster, who of course was a very close personal friend of Hillary Clinton, and then also Bill, whose office was in the White House, who had been a law partner in the same firm as Hillary and involved in the so-called Whitewater scandal, was found one day at Fort Marcy Park, just outside in D.C., in the state of Virginia. He was sitting leaning backward against a small hillock, and it appeared that he had been shot. The wound evidently had gone into his mouth, and there was blood. The gun was lying there. This is fascinating that they did not call FBI, D.C., or Virginia homicide detectives. The investigation was handled by the Fort Marcy Park Police. You can imagine what kind of experience the Park Police have in dealing with homicides. Absolutely inexplicable when you consider, and as I said, the identity of the individual and the relationships that he had with the President of the United States and the First Lady. Then the autopsy was done by a board-certified forensic pathologist who was, kind of like semi-retired. What is interesting is the equipment proved to be defective. The X-ray machine that did not work. Then some pictures, I think, later on were either obfuscated or even lost, etc. And the whole thing became an incredible mess. The investigation continued with a scene study, and they never found the bullet that exited in the back of Foster's head. That bullet was never found. That's interesting because other bullets were found, not to mention all kinds of food wrappers, used condoms, and what have you, but the bullet was never found. The gun had belonged to Vincent Foster, or passed on from his father, as I recall. And so, but in the absence of the slug, there could not be a match because there was nothing to match. I recall that Richard Scaife, who is here in Pittsburgh, a billionaire and a very, very arch conservative, the single largest contributor to Richard Nixon's creep campaign, the re-election campaign, that he, Scaife, hired an investigative reporter named Christopher Roddy, R-O-D-D-Y, paid him, I don't know how much, but he was full-time for an extended period. And I met and talked with him. We developed a nice relationship. He was a gentleman. And we reviewed the findings and facts and so on. Scaife was dead certain that there was something more sinister than just a suicide. As I like to facetiously state when I'm talking about my famous cases, when I discuss Vincent Foster, I look out at the audience and with a kind of a smile on my face, I say that, of course, the ultra right-wing Republicans know what the true scenario was, that Bill Clinton came home unexpectedly early from the office one day, found Vincent Foster in bed with Hillary, got teed off, shot and killed him, and had the Secret Service take the body and dump it at Fort Marcy Park. And I was getting a kick out of that. But I don't think that happened. And although you can already tell from my earlier remarks that I'm quite critical of the investigation and point out the deficiencies of the crime scene study as well as the follow-up, I must say that I never found any basis whatsoever, nor am I aware of any hard physical forensic evidence of any kind to indicate that this was something other than a suicide. That Foster did kill himself at that point, at that place.
I had wanted, if you could, to have you comment if you had been, brought in as the forensic scientist, pathologist in the three major political assassinations, John F. Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, and Martin Luther King. Would you have done anything different in terms of how you handled their autopsy?
Of course. With John F. Kennedy any experienced, competent forensic pathologist would not have missed the fact that there was a bullet hole in the president's neck on the night of the autopsy that Friday, November 22nd, 1963. I am certain that all of the good people there assembled with you, John, are aware that Humes and Boswell had never done a single gunshot wound autopsy in their entire careers. I always hammer that point. When I talk to an audience, I say, look, 88, 85%, 75% of the American public continues to reject the Warren Commission report and recognizes that it is absurd scientific nonsense. But there's always been that 15, 20, 25% that goes along saying that, my God, how could the government lie to us? Why would they lie to us? How could they cover up and so on? And I all start off by saying, look, know for openers that the two pathologists in charge at Bethesda Naval Center, Humes and Boswell, had never done a gunshot wound case. Pierre Fink, brought in late from the Armed Forces Institute of Pathology, an Army man in D.C., arrived late, was not permitted to really do the things that he could. He did have experience, although his experience was mostly with military missiles, Vietnam, that's what he dealt with. He was not a city, so to speak, forensic pathologist. I'm not sure how many handgun or rifle type cases he had handled, but he did have some experience. And Pierre tried to get things straightened out, and he asked, and I knew Pierre, I did not know Humes and Boswell. I knew Pierre Fink from my 2 days in the military and the American Academy of Forensic Sciences, and we had a friendly relationship. And he was from Switzerland, and he had a stern visage, but a nice guy, but no nonsense kind of a guy. And I wasn't there, but I could just close my eyes and picture this. And Pierre Fink, and this is documented, who was in charge. And he wanted, to find out what's going on, and so on, and a gruff voice from the audience. And John, you may know who it was. I don't know if it's ever been identified. Probably one of those 4-star admirals or generals said, Doctor, we are, or whatever, just proceed. And they were limited in what they could do and told to move it along and so on. And so Pierre Fink really played a minor role. He was very disgusted. I will tell you that in 1964, in February, at the American Academy of Forensic Sciences, just 3 months after the shooting, I sat down with Pierre, coffee, and I asked him, what had happened, to the extent that he could talk. And of course, he was not able to talk, but he was so sad, you could tell that he was a very, very professionally, personally unhappy individual because of the way in which things have been handled. So getting back to your question, any competent forensic pathologist would have picked up that bullet wound, number one. Number two, they would have talked with the doctors in Dallas before commencing the autopsy, and of course that's when they would have learned about the wound if they didn't see it themselves and recognize it. The fact that the tracheostomy was superimposed upon the neck wound, they would have learned had they talked with Dr. Perry or somebody else there, which you always do in a case, especially involving, obviously, an important person, but where someone has had surgery and incisions have been made and someone has been stabbed or shot. You don't know if the incisions have been made over a pre-existing stab wound or gunshot wound. And so you have to talk with the surgeons to find that out. Did they inadvertently, not malevolently and deliberately, but did they inadvertently destroy, obfuscate the anatomic topography of the wound by virtue of cutting through it, because that's what doctors will do when they're trying to save somebody's life. They want to get to the seat of the hemorrhage, and they don't know where exactly the bleeding vessel is. Well, what's the best and fastest way, as far as they're concerned? Go right down through the opening and follow it, and that'll take you to the site of the damaged organs or tissues and blood vessels. So that's what they do. Well, so I would have done that. And I would not have been in such a hurry, obviously, and not responding to someone's commands. But of course, you see, that is exactly why. The top forensic pathologist at that time, and it wasn't me, I was just getting started, Dr. Milton Halpert from New York, Dr. Richard Ford from Boston, Dr. Russell Fisher from Baltimore, Dr. Joe Spellman from Philadelphia, and Dr. Geoffrey Mann from Virginia. And the people that I've named are the very people who used to go to the AFIP and lecture twice a year at forensic pathology seminars, 2 of which I attended when I was in the Air Force, and then my chief kindly brought to my attention and permitted me to go from my base in Montgomery, Alabama, at Maxwell Air Force Base. So that's why those people were not called in, don't you see, because they could not be controlled. As civilians, they would have said, screw you, I'm not going to do this, you're not going to tell me what to do, lay down your scalpel and leave. That's why Hughes and Boswell were called in. Not only to cover up in the sense, as a matter of fact, I don't believe, John, and folks, that they knew what they were going to be covering up. They had no idea what the wounds were going to defect. They didn't know about the Zapruder film at that time. They didn't know about the Manicure Carcano. They certainly did not know about the test firing of the Manicure Carcano, and that it took 2.3 seconds from shot to shot. They knew none of that. The purpose was not to cover up something that they knew had to be covered up. The purpose was to have people doing it that they could control then and later. And who can you control if you're in the military? You control any career officer who is lower in rank than 3- and 4-star generals and admirals. That's what it was all about. With regard to Robert Kennedy, the autopsy was meticulous, thorough. The best damn autopsy that's ever been performed, except that regrettably, until this day, my colleague, and I regret to say, but the truth must be known, and that is that Dr. Noguchi has not spoken out. He did originally, it's a matter of record, that the gunshot wound that killed Robert Kennedy not only moved from back forward, striking him behind the right ear, and moving toward the front of his forehead, while Sirhan was standing in front of Kennedy, how they managed to shoot him behind the ear, but even more importantly, and more totally destructive of the Sirhan sole assassin conclusion is the fact that the wound that killed Robert Kennedy was fired 1 to 1.5 inches away from the senator's mastoid area. I just did it yesterday here at our national conference. I did it a week ago Friday in Houston at a national conference. I did it Monday a week ago at a national meeting in Dallas. I love to do this with audiences. Folks, how far was Sirhan's gotten when he shot Kennedy? And over the years, I bet collectively, I must have tossed this out to 10,000 people. I don't know, I don't keep track, but it's got to be over 10,000 people. Audiences here and there, probably 20,000, who knows? 4 feet, 6 feet, 8 feet, 10 feet. I think once or twice in all these years, somebody has said 1 foot. When I tell them that Noguchi and 4 or 5 forensic pathologists on his staff, 3 board-certified forensic pathologists from the AFIP, whom I had recommended to Tom, he should invite so that they would try and spirit away the body of the senator like they did with the president in Dallas back in '63. And the 2 civilians that he consulted, me and William Eckert, since deceased, that 9 or 10 of us all agree unequivocally, absolutely, without any difference of opinion at all, that shot was fired 1 to 1.5 inches. So there, my criticism is to get the truth out. Now, it wasn't Noguchi's fault at the time of the trial, because he was never asked this by Grant Cooper, the defense attorney. No forensic expert was ever called by Grant Cooper to testify for the defense. Not a forensic pathologist, not a criminalist, not a ballistics expert, not one forensic expert except for forensic psychiatrists. The case was tried solely on the diminished capacity theory that exists in the state of California, which is basically legal insanity. and we're moving on to Mary Jo Quebecme. Well, what by God, the criticism is obvious, isn't it? No autopsy was done. So isn't this fascinating? What an incredible paradox that in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, the first state to adopt a medical examiner system, seemingly to improve, to professionalize the system, to get it out of the hands of lay coroners. In 1877, that 92 years later, almost a century later, there stands a doctor with the fancy title of Deputy Medical Examiner, an MD, at COPA, and he makes the decision that the body of a young woman, not even identified at that time, in a submerged car, does not have to be autopsied. Now, in that case, I testified that in Wilkes-Barre, Luzerne County, Pennsylvania, later on, for Edmund Denise, the District Attorney of Suffolk County, Boston, trying to get the body exhumed, which was unsuccessful. And I was a consultant to Dr. Noguchi in the Robert F. Kennedy case, and then you know about my involvement in John F. Kennedy. So I'm glad someone asked that question, because I always talk about, my involvement in the three Kennedys, and I point out the interesting, fascinating defects, obfuscations, cover-ups, negligence in those three cases. Absolutely incredible.
And could you comment about Francisco and Martin Luther King?
Yeah, well, Jerry Francisco was a more of a Machiavellian manipulator than he was a medical examiner. He was a board-certified forensic pathologist. Wasn't a matter of his being incompetent, but he played games whenever was necessary. And what he did with Martin Luther King and the way in which it was handled was not thorough and complete. And by the way, while it's not of political concern, I'm sure it's of great interest to your audience, Elvis Presley, to also illustrate, corroborate, buttress the critical comment I just made about Jerry Francisco. When Elvis Presley died, a young man in his early 40s, suddenly, inexplicably, that was clearly an ME case. Francisco knew that there was no way he could get out of not doing an autopsy, not having it performed, and he also knew that if his office did it, that the results would get out eventually, if not that day, next week, next month. There was no way they would be able to keep a public autopsy, NEMI autopsy secret forever. So he finessed it and said it's going to be a private autopsy that the family has requested, and it's going to be done at Baptist Hospital. He goes there, nevertheless, even though he himself has given up his jurisdiction. The autopsy is hardly completed. Microscopic studies haven't been done, obviously, and toxicology tests clearly are going to take days and weeks. And he's out there holding the news conference announcing that Elvis Presley died as a result of heart disease. Elvis Presley had no heart disease. What Elvis Presley had were 14 central nervous system drugs. Analgesics, antidepressants, anxiolytics, sedatives, tranquilizers, anything that Elvis needed. His good friend, Dr. Nicopolis, one of the major sycophants hangers on there at Graceland, whatever Elvis needed, good old Dr. Nick wrote the prescription. But that case was covered up like unbelievable by Francisco. And he did the same kind of a thing for obvious reasons with Martin Luther King. And by the way, let me mention, John, and you probably know maybe more about this than I, and if you don't, find out and get the word out to all the COPA people. There's going to be a series of high-powered presentations on the Martin Luther King case. I've been invited to be a member of that panel, and I know one's coming up in Philadelphia in January, and then I think one in New York, and then one, I think, in Louisiana, and then I think they're going to do one in Pittsburgh. So if you know about those, John, tell your people later today or when you find out the specific dates, and let everybody know.
Yeah, we'd like to know about them, I'm sure. We got some other questions here, yeah?
What was Dr. Wecht's opinion of Dr. Earl Rose of Parkland, who would have done the autopsy if the body had not been spirited out?
What was your opinion of Dr. Earl Rose at Parkland, who, had the body not been spirited away, might have done the autopsy?
Earl Rose was a competent board-certified forensic pathologist. He was there, as you know. He tried, along with another local official, a magistrate, coroner, to get the autopsy. They were pushed aside, threatened, profanity hurled around, guns on, hands on guns, the Secret Service, FBI, and I think Earl Rose even followed them out into the driveway. The man tried. What the hell could he do? I can't criticize him at all. I don't know anything more I or anybody else could or would or should have done. In my opinion, if the autopsy had been done by Earl Rose, we would not be talking now. In fact, John, maybe you see, I'll say this obviously with the total insincerity, but if Earl Rose had done the autopsy, there would be no COPA, and John Judge would not be the executive director, and Cyril Wecht would not be the hotshot that he is if the autopsy had been done by Earl Rose. That was the beginning of my national career.
Well, we're much relieved it didn't happen that way, I guess.
Find out the names of the Secret Service agents in the emergency room, and you and I will send them thank you notes.
All right, that's a good suggestion. I understood that Francesca was also invited by the LAPD to come and do the autopsy on Robert Kennedy.
Jerry Francisco?
Yes, right at the time that they put a call through to him.
No way, Tom. No. Tom was an excellent forensic pathologist. He didn't need anybody for that purpose. He called me at 3 o'clock in the morning, and I thought, my God, Tom's got his times mixed up again, forgetting the 3-hour difference, just to give my advice and thoughts, not on how to perform the autopsy, but how to keep the body from being taken away. I suggested he get in touch with Pierre Salinger, a Californian, invite him in, talk with him, let him be the liaison, the go-between with the family. I suggested that he invite the military pathologists from the AFIP and so on, and all of that worked. But Tom wasn't looking for anybody to come and do the autopsy.
Yeah,
Certainly not Francisco. No way.
my understanding was not that it was Noguchi that was inviting him, but that the LAPD had called him.
Well, the LAPD did not control Tom Noguchi, I can tell you. Not like has happened in later years with the LAPD calling the tune, like in the OJ case, not even calling the medical examiner to the scene for 8 or 10 hours after the bodies were discovered, and holding back and doing things whenever they want to, and everything. The Michael Jackson case, that was not the way things were handled when Noguchi. In fact, that's why they got Tom forced out. They tried the first time, they failed. They tried the second time and succeeded, at least not getting him removed from his tenured position at the Los Angeles General Hospital, but getting him out of the office because they knew that they could not control Tom. No, I don't know where that came from. I've never heard that. I can tell you unhesitatingly that is not true. I can't tell you whether what some LAPD cop would have liked to have done, although I don't know what their relationship was with Jerry Francisco. I mean, he was there in Tennessee. I'm not aware of any involvement that he ever had in California. I've never heard of any.
Someone else? Yeah.
Actually, tell us a little bit about what he found out about the John Benet Ramsey case.
Someone wanted you to talk to what you found out about the John Benet Ramsey case.
Well, as you know, there's been some recent activity there. The new district attorney issued an invitation to Burke, our brother, who was 9, 10 at the time. He's now 23 years of age. I don't know whether Burke Ramsey has gone in and talked with the DA. I don't know that. I know my colleague and good friend Dr. Henry Lee was just here in Pittsburgh. I asked Henry if he had heard from any of the authorities out there recently. He has not. I don't know that anything's being done. We don't have time to get into the Ramsey case, but I will tell you folks out there, I'll summarize the Ramsey case like this, that when you next see me, and I think you all know what I look like, and many of you know me personally, and you know that I'm bald on the top of my head. So I always say to an audience, when you next see me with 3-4 inches of hair, of my natural hair, growing out of the top of my head, that's when they'll find the intruder in the Ramsey case. No goddamn intruder in the Ramsey case. And that was an unexpected, accidental, tragic death that was not intended. It occurred during a sexual perversion game that had been played before. This little 6-year-old girl, a good part of her hymen was absent. Chronic inflammation seen microscopically on the vaginal lining. Focal superficial erosion on the vaginal mucosa at the 7 o'clock position. Any ladies there, I don't mean to be crude, but just picture the last time you had a gynecological pelvic exam and a right-handed examiner is doing a digital exam, ain't she? The index finger doing the exam, 7 o'clock position, you get the idea. And birefringent material seen under polarized light from the vaginal lining. The most ubiquitous source of birefringent material in any of our homes is what? Talcum powder. Put it together. Absent hymen, in great part, chronic inflammation, focal erosion, talcum powder. You get the idea? Noose around the neck, but interestingly, with the garment pulled up so the noose never touches the skin. Noose around the right wrist, overlying the garment so it never touches the skin. What happened was there was a vasovagal reflex. Anytime you put something around somebody's neck, you always stand a chance of producing a vagal reflex. The 10th cranial nerve coming out of the brain, one on each side, coursing down the neck, entering the chest cavity, sending fibers over to the heart, gets irritated by something around the neck. The irritation leads to a slowing down, bradycardia of the heart, a cardiac arrhythmia, and the next thing you know, if that's not reversed, you go into cardiorespiratory depression, cardiorespiratory arrest, and death. That's what happened. The blow to the head was inflicted when she was already dead or dying. You've got a fracture that is 7.5, 8 inches long from the front of the skull to the back of the skull. If that fracture had been inflicted when she was alive, there would have been a fair amount of bleeding because you don't die right away. You don't die until the brain stem gets impinged against the foramen magnum, the opening at the base of the skull. And when the brain swells as a result of the collecting blood and the injury, you don't die because you're hit on the top of the head. You may get a concussion, but you don't die. So how much blood do we have from this kind of a tremendous injury? 7 cc's. That's 1.5 teaspoonfuls of blood. 1.5 teaspoonfuls. That's nothing more than a simple outflow, gravitational outflow as the person is dead or dying. She was hit on the head as she's already dead or dying to simulate a brutal attack by an outside intruder. And then, of course, you get into the whole cockamamie business of that absurd note, the kidnap note, written conveniently with pen and paper found in the home because this alleged intruder forgot to bring pen and paper with him. He goes in the middle of the night in total darkness, finds it, writes a note. We represent a foreign faction, a small foreign faction. We want $118,000. You like that number? I always like to ask people in the audience, how much would you get, sir, for a kidnapping? You look like a novice. And there's a guy in the third row. He looks like he's been around for a while. He's probably going to get a hell of a lot more. $118,000. Is that a nice round number? That was exactly the amount of money that John Ramsey got as a bonus from his company the year before. How many people do you think knew what John Ramsey's bonus was from his company the year before? $118,000. And then this rapist, murderer, kidnapping, having all the chutzpah in the world, writing a note, not worrying about being found or hurt or so on, and he leaves the house. What did he forget? How's about a 45-pound package named John Bonet? He writes the goddamn note, leaves it there, and after doing everything in the world so adroitly, so adeptly, so fantastically cleverly, getting in and out of the house, not waking anybody up, knowing where her room is, knowing where her room is in the basement, that a maid who worked there for 6 months never even knew existed, a room that the detectives didn't even know existed or didn't even think of when they got there at 6 o'clock in the morning, a room into which nobody went until John Ramsey went 7 hours later at 1 p.m., but this intruder, he knew about that room. So he did all of that, but when it comes time then to capitalize on this incredible, remarkable feat, he leaves the body. That is the John Benet Ramsey case.
Follow-up, does the evidence
Follow-up.
indicate one or more than one perpetrator?
Does the evidence indicate one or more than one perpetrator?
I think one, John. I believe one person did this. And, well, no, I don't believe, I'm positive. And I believe it was John, the father. I believe the game had been played before. I don't think there's any question about this. And I don't think it was the mother. She was out of the sex business, ovarian cancer, and, you know, it all fitted in. And this was something that the old man was doing. He had no intention of harming his daughter. This is the tragedy. And now with Patsy dead, I don't know that we'll ever learn the truth. I doubt it. Well, John, I think it's getting toward quitting time for you guys, and for me too here. Do you have another question or two, please?
Someone else?
In the Ramsey case, who do you think wrote the letter, John or the wife, or who?
Who wrote the letter, John or the wife?
Very interesting. They have ruled out the detectives there, presumably a handwriting expert. I can only tell you what they have said. I have no basis to challenge this. They said that they ruled out John with the writing of the note, and they have not ruled out Patsy. I talked to some people involved, and they feel that she wrote it with her left hand, printing it out, and that fits in so many ways. There's no question that she became complicit. I think she then had a decision to make, not an easy one for her. Her daughter's dead, you know, so what do? You call the cops and you say, well, my husband was playing games with my daughter. Remember, you don't have a situation here. You can say somebody fell down steps, somebody fell off a toy horse in the backyard, or that, you know, I mean, you got a case where they just came back from their Christmas parties late the night before, and it's now early in the morning. What are you going to say? They were scheduled to leave for their Christmas holiday. What are you going to say? What did she die from? She, you know, is too old to be a SIDS death, sudden unexpected infant death syndrome. She was a healthy kid. What are you going to tell them? So you make a decision. And you know, the detectives that got there, you know how much experience they had? That was the first and only homicide death investigation for that year in the county of Boulder, and maybe one or two in each of the previous years. Instead of calling in the homicide detectives from Denver, from the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, they handled it. They had no experience at all. And as I've already said, you know, and they didn't protect the scene. Two other couples, including Fleet White, John Ramsey's closest friend, who became his most bitter enemy, and who turned on him and has just stopped short of stating outright that John Ramsey is responsible for his daughter's death. So Fleet White and his wife, and a minister, his wife, were invited over. They're traipsing around the house. And as I've already said, it started until 1 o'clock in the afternoon that John Ramsey goes with Fleet White around the house and finds his daughter in that basement room. It's a sad and tragic tale, and another example of gross incompetence on the part of investigating authorities. And by the way, the police never interrogated at that time, nor to my knowledge since that time, separately, John and Patsy. And what do you think would happen? Anybody there? I'm a grandfather. With any of my grandchildren come to my house, all 11 of them, every Sunday, and one of them winds up missing and then is found dead. Or more specifically, and analogously, one comes over to sleep by himself, herself, and is found dead, and the only adults in the house are my wife and me. How do you think that would be handled? Dr. Wecht, would you please go with Detective Jones? He'd like to talk with you in the kitchen. Mrs. Wecht, would you please go with Detective Smith? She would like to talk with you in the living room. That's what you do, isn't it? You don't have to be a television fan or a fiction detective novel avid reader to know that. That was never done in this case. And then within less than 24 hours, a matter of hours, he's got the top attorneys, politically connected attorneys in place there in Colorado. They line up all of these experts and so on, and the whole goddamn investigation then gets thwarted, aborted, and mishandled from the beginning. And then when a couple of the cops, including the chief, tried to speak out later on, then they got blasted and threatened. In fact, I was on a program with one of them. I can't think of his name right now. I believe he wrote a book, and he tried to delve into it and so on. And they were stopped by the district attorney, who never wanted to proceed with this case. Alex Hunter, he was the most gentle, kind, benevolent, defense-oriented district attorney that has ever been elected to that office in America in our 200-plus years existence. So put that all together, and you got the formula for failure.
Well, Cyril, thanks for being with us. I didn't know if you had it.
Sorry the TV did not work, but I hope that the sound...
John, amplify.
You all will have
Amplify.
a great Thanksgiving, folks. Sorry I could not be with you, John. Thanks for inviting me again. And folks, as I always say, hang in there. And John, tell those younger folks to be there. You and I will be looking down on them from our perch somewhere and hoping that they can accomplish what we have not succeeded in doing, and that is getting the truth in the John F. Kennedy case. It's going to happen someday. I wish I could be around. I can't honestly say that I think that I will be, because it's going to take another generation or two, but goddamn it, one day it is going to come out. One day it will come out. So keep fighting, folks. Thanks, John. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Cyril. You can log out of the site. Thanks so much.